Welcome to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, where you'll hear highly accomplished and fascinating guests talk about the challenges they've overcome and the winning mindsets that have led them to great success. And now your host, Dr. Bob.
Welcome to another episode in Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. The major objective of my podcast is to counter the current narrative that is pushed by the mainstream media that America is not a special country and that the system is rigged against individuals. My podcasts counter that narrative by introducing you to interesting people who, from very modest means, were able to achieve success because of their hard work, energy, and tenacity. America did not give my guests the guarantee of success, but it did give each of them the opportunity to succeed, and my guest today took that opportunity. Derrick Van Order and his brother grew up in poverty in rural Minnesota. They were raised by their mother, who taught them the importance of hard work and self-reliance. And those lessons struck, because as of today, at 52, Derrick Van Order has achieved success in not one, not two, not three, but four totally different fields. First, as a warrior defending our country. He joined the Navy when he was 18 and advanced through the ranks and retired 26 years later as a Navy SEAL, senior officer with combat deployments around the world. Next, as an actor. He starred in the action motion picture Act of Valor, followed by roles in 2 additional films. His third career was as an author. He penned the best-selling book, A Book of Man, a Navy SEAL's Guide to the Lost Art of Manhood. His fourth career was as a businessman. After retiring from the Navy, he and his wife opened a village cafe in Butternut, Wisconsin, appropriately named the Butternut Cafe, which he ran successfully for 3 years until he decided to try yet one more different career. He is with us today to talk about those 4 careers and to give us a glimpse into his next one, his 5th career. Derrick is entering politics. He is now the Republican candidate for a House seat representing Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District, and he has earned the endorsements of leading Republicans, House Whip Steve Scalise, Republican leader of the House Kevin McCarthy, and in the Senate, both Ron Johnson and Tom Cotton have endorsed him. And last but not least, he received the endorsement of President Trump.
And we have a great congressional candidate, Derrick Van Order. I support you 100%. You know that. You have my total endorsement.
4 careers and a 5th that's on deck. There's a lot to talk about, Derrick. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's great to see your home. It's nice to be back in California for a little period of time. I was stationed here for 16 years. My wife is a San Diego native, and we live in Wisconsin on purpose, though. Let's make sure we understand that. Yeah. It snowed 6 inches yesterday, and I'm very happy to be there. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that some people like snow. I happen not to be one of them. But let's start with your most recent next career, your run for Congress.
Sure.
You know, most people who have accomplished only a fraction of what you've achieved would retire, just as you did when you opened the Butternut Cafe as a pleasant respite for your neighbors.
Yeah.
What made you change your mind and enter into the very, very tough game of politics?
I wrote an email to the sitting congressman, and he didn't respond. It was that simple. I wrote an email to Ron Kind, who'd been in office at that point for 22 years, and asked him what his stance on the impeachment of Donald Trump was for the Russian collusion hoax and he failed to respond to me. So I did human intelligence for quite a period of time in the SEAL teams, and I started looking into Ron Kind. And it's exceptionally difficult to find terrorists in caves in Pakistan. It's really hard. It's not hard to find things about political leaders in the United States because everything's public knowledge. So I looked into Ron Kind, and I realized that he was not a problem with politics. He was the problem with politics. He was the poster child for what's wrong with our political system. And through a series of confluence of events, I decided to run against him to take him out of office. I ran against him in 2020. I lost by 2 points.
Not bad for a first run.
Not bad for a first run. Did 9 months of a campaign, all of which, other than the first 72 hours, was under COVID. He started with $3.1 million in the bank, 100% name recognition in a political machine, and I had none of that. So we came within 2 points, decided to run again in 2022 because I knew that things were not going to get better in the country. I had no idea they were going to get this bad this fast. And so I think that was a prudent decision to run, and we have to take the country back in 2022. The House of Representatives with a 2-year term was the tripwire that was built in by our founding fathers to be able to stop madness like we see taking place right now in our government. So I'm running. We're doing very, very well, and I'm looking forward to taking back the House under Kevin McCarthy's leadership.
Well, thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Republicans don't seem to understand that the Democratic Party today is not the party of John F. Kennedy.
Right.
It is now the party of the radical left. The AOCs and Rashida Tlaib of the world are the spokespeople for this party. They aren't interested in working together to solve the problems that we face. Their objective is to change America, to fundamentally change America, to do away with the free market capitalistic system that has made America so great. Does America need fundamental changes, Derrick?
Well, I don't really think so. I think that the way our country was designed to give the maximum amount of freedom to individuals possible within the construct of a functioning society is very important. If you think about the basic constitutional freedoms that were articulated in our founding documents, they're not given to you by the government, they're articulated. So we understand that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? Amongst those are. Those are granted by God, but they're articulated in our Constitution. And I don't think that needs changing. If you look objectively at capitalism as a governmental system, it has raised more people out of poverty than any other system. And that's a good thing. We want to have equality amongst people. When you delve into equity, where you're leveling a playing field artificially, it actually doesn't level the playing field.
Well, it's equality under the law, which is guaranteed by the Constitution.
Correct.
It's not equality of outcome. I think it was
It's opportunity, vice, outcome. And
opportunity is what's guaranteed.
Right, so Thomas Sowell, who is a brilliant man, he's an economist and a scholar who, as a younger man, raised in Harlem, he's an African American, he was a Marxist. And then if you listen to him speak, he went through this evolutionary process of understanding how the world really works. And he turned from Marxism into capitalism because he understands truly that this is a functioning system that works great. And his big thing is you need to have equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome.
Correct.
And the example that Thomas Sowell uses is you'll have 3 kids in a family. They have the same parents. They clearly are within the same socioeconomic group because they have the same parents. They have the same education. They have the same household, the same food. Everything about them externally is the same. And you have one that winds up being a constitutional scholar. You have one that is a police officer, and you have another one that is a drug dealer. So you have,
That's right.
You all have the same opportunities. It's the outcome that is predicated on your decision making. And I think it's really important that we adhere to that as Americans.
And the free market system rewards people for the contributions they've made to society. Let me talk about this. A lot of people don't understand capitalism. When a person performs a service or invents a product or sells a product to an individual, the individual gives him money, paper, ones and zeros, in exchange for the service or the product that he gave. So income, the money he made, is a direct reflection of the value of what he gave to society.
Correct.
What he gave to society. A lot of leftists think that capitalism means taking away from society. It doesn't mean that. It means rewarding people with ones and zeros for what they contributed to society. And all the more we want people to create things, to create services or goods that other people will purchase. So, in my view, the income tax is exactly the wrong kind of tax. It taxes people, it punishes people from giving to society. The right kind of tax would be a consumption tax or a sales tax, that when an individual buys a house or a boat or a car, that person is taking from society, and that's the right time to charge a tax. But to tax people from contributing to society makes absolutely no sense. So we have a disparity in wealth in America. And as Winston Churchill so wisely said, capitalism leads to the unequal distribution of wealth, but socialism leads to the equal distribution of misery.
Right.
Misery.
Winston Churchill also said that capitalism was the worst system of government except for all other systems of government. Right.
And the young adults in our society that are boosting for socialism have never been to a socialist country. And what I'm likely to do, and I'm looking into ways of doing this, is sending leading student leaders who are in favor of socialism. I'm going to send them, my program is to send them to Venezuela or to Cuba for a month, and then see what their viewpoint is after they return.
That's a very interesting concept.
You look at these countries, any country that is socialistic is a disaster, and it doesn't get any better. So I hope you do get your seat in Congress. And what are the main important issues that you will focus on?
First and foremost, we have to stop this spending. So if you have $100 and you spend $100, right? That's all the money you have. You don't get to go to your neighbor's house and take more money. Spend their $100 either, right? So we have to stop this radical, out of control spending. We have to secure our borders. A nation without borders is not a nation. We've had over 2 million illegal immigrant encounters with the Border Patrol since Biden has been in office. So we've got 11,200 pounds of fentanyl was seized coming across the border. That's enough to kill 2.8 billion people. That's over a quarter of the Earth's population worth of fentanyl was seized coming across the border since Biden has been in office. It's unsustainable. If you think about conceptually how many people that is, we had 158,000-ish people enter the country illegally last month. It's unsustainable. And if you think about the misery with human smuggling, for sex trafficking, the drug smuggling that's coming across the border right now, it's unconscionable that we would allow this to take place.
How do the Democrats rationalize this?
They don't.
What do they say?
They ignore it.
They say it's the right thing to do to let people in?
No, they ignore it.
They don't comment.
They ignore it. And it's time that we pay attention to it. So 2 months ago, I went down to the U.S.-Texas border with Tony Gonzalez. He's a U.S. congressman from that area. He's a retired Navy guy also. Invited me down. We spoke to a couple sheriffs, Border Patrol Union, some farmers, and some ranchers that live on the border. And it was really interesting because one of the sheriffs was a Blue Dog Democrat. The other guy was a Make America Great Again Trump supporter. But both of them said that this simply was not like this when President Trump was in office. So right prior to President Trump taking office, there was a huge influx of illegal immigration. Remember the caravans that were coming up?
I recall.
Okay. And President Trump said, this is not the right thing. This is bad. So he enacted some policies, remain in Mexico, the Title 42, deporting people, actually flying them down.
No more catch and release.
No more catch and release. And the spigot was shut off because of that. The last month that President Trump was in office, 15,000 people came into the country. 15,000.
That's it. Right. Nothing.
We just had 150,000 last month.
10 times.
Right. So we need to understand that these policies have real implications. I live in rural Wisconsin. We're an agricultural district, and we've had hundreds of people overdose on fentanyl. They don't make fentanyl in the United States. So the precursor chemicals or the final chemical itself is produced in China. It's brought into Mexico. If it's not, if it's the fentanyl is actually not produced yet, the precursor chemicals, they make the fentanyl, they press it into pills, they put it in marijuana, they put it in all these different, drugs. It's smuggled into the United States, and then people use it and they die of overdose. The leading cause of death for Americans from the age of 18 to 45 is fentanyl overdose.
I had no idea.
It's the leading cause of death. So it just wasn't like that.
And here the administration is focusing on COVID and masks and vaccines, but the leading cause of death is illegal fentanyl.
18 to
most
45.
of it coming over the border.
90% of the fentanyl that is brought into the United States comes across the southern border. That's a real issue.
In addition, that's an addition to these illegal aliens who come here and use our resources, whether they're medical resources or financial resources, and are bleeding the country, and they don't deserve, they haven't earned the right to have these benefits, to go to school here, to go to the hospitals here, to the emergency rooms here.
I was speaking today, before we got over here, with a Swedish American. So he's born in Sweden, but he's Croatian. He's ethnically Croatian, born in Sweden, came here from the United States. Took him 11 years to become a citizen. Yeah. And he said he'd be the first person to deport anybody from Sweden who's in the United States illegally. Mm-hmm. This is not a racial issue. It's an issue with following the law.
And this has been a country that has always been open to immigration.
Of course.
My grandparents came here from both sides, my four grandparents, under legal immigration.
We're a nation of
immigrants. And they didn't want anything other than opportunity. They didn't ask for anything. They didn't get anything in those times. There was no welfare. They worked hard to make a career. They learned the language. There was no such thing as language in Croatian or Ukrainian or Russia. It was English. And that's how it should be.
We are a nation of immigrants. And that is really, truly one of the strengths of the United States, the melting pot, where we get to take these cultures from around the world. But at the end of the day, we're all Americans. So you talk to, in my district, it's fascinating. We have a large group of Polish Americans that fled communism that now live in the United States. Some of the finest American citizens you're ever going to meet because they came from a place.
They know better.
And they understand how bad it can be.
They get it.
Right. Right. So when people try to paint Republicans as non-inclusive, they try to paint us as anti-immigrant.
Bullshit.
Well, you can say that. I would say that it's wholly inappropriate. And it's just not accurate.
You just have to be a little bit more subtle in
well,
your
it's just not accurate. It's not appreciated. Yeah.
We are at a tipping point in our society.
We are, right? An inflection point.
We're at a point where this country could turn into a socialist country where we could lose the rights that are God-given but are enumerated. I like the way you put that in the Constitution.
Articulated.
Freedom of speech is at risk these days. You have to be careful what you say. Even though it's legal to say what you want, you're afraid to say it because you'll be deplatformed. What do you think about these major corporations like Facebook and Twitter that have set their own rules. Now, as I understand it, years ago when the internet was first established, the government...
I believe Al Gore invented it.
Right before Al Gore invented it. The government put in place certain laws that said they're going to be not held liable to what's on the internet because it's a free speech zone. It's like a bulletin board, but it is no longer a bulletin board.
Right. So there's 5 elements to the First Amendment: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of redress. I would ask you, during these last couple of years, which one of those elements of the First Amendment has not been trounced? So freedom of religion, they locked our churches and synagogues.
Right.
Freedom of speech, that's what we're talking about. So they censored the ability to say something. Right, deplatforming or censoring these folks. The freedom of the press, they've limited the press's ability to print things that they saw as truthful, right? The freedom of assembly. You can't get together more than 6 people or 2 people. You got to be masked. You have to have a vaccine, all this stuff. That's freedom of assembly.
And if you go to a school committee meeting, you're a terrorist.
Right. And then freedom of redress. The ability to speak to governmental officials and say that you don't agree with a particular policy has also been interrupted. So that...
Every one of those freedoms.
Every one of them. And that's the First Amendment. And I think it's fascinating. You know, in the military, you order things, the way you say things, the order is by precedence. So the first thing you say is the most important, then the second, then the third, then the fourth. The first thing that the Founding Fathers wrote in the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment, was the freedom of religion, the Establishment Clause, right? So that the Founding Fathers understood that the ability to freely exercise and worship as you see fit or not to was the most important thing to maintain freedom in a society. And the second one being able to verbalize what you're thinking without being trounced by the government. And I've seen, and I'm sure that you've seen, a lot of people listening to this or watching this, have seen the decline of those 2 most important fundamental rights that we have. And that's got to stop. And the only way that we can stop that is if all men and women of good cheer stand up and say enough. And I've had enough.
Yes, it's not just up to the few, like yourself and myself, that I backed certain lawsuits in California against the restrictions on praying in churches and temples.
Right.
It's up to the average person to say, we've had enough. We're not going to follow these mandates. Since when is this a country of mandates? It's a country of laws. But it's not a country of mandates or edicts or government-issued orders. We don't have to follow orders. They order you to wear a mask. Who gave them the power to issue an order? And it all depends on Americans standing up and saying, I've had enough.
Look at what happened in the Loudoun County school boards in Virginia. The parents just said, I've had enough of this. And what that did is culturally, I believe that made a lot of people awake, not woke. And they really understood that the culture is being dictated by the people that are running these schools.
And it's a small minority of people. A lot of people don't understand this. They think that most people believe in this woke aspect. It's not. It's a small minority. And in every revolution, it's caused by a small number of people who are very vocal and capture the media and the ability to convince people. But it's a small minority of people. Most people don't believe that there are more sexes than 2.
Well, I think that Americans are very courteous people. And we really don't want to offend other people. We truly want people to live the way they want to be able to live their lives.
Well, that's a statement about conservatives. Conservatives live that way.
Okay, I'll grant you that. But
not leftists. Leftists don't care.
What I'm saying is this, is that we tend to allow people to say things, even if we disagree with them publicly, and we keep to ourselves. And the time for that is over.
It's over.
And let me give you a ludicrously graphic example of what happens. So you're just going to be a prop for a second at this point, okay? You ready?
Sure.
So you are an enemy combatant on the battlefield. I'm a Navy SEAL. We get into a gunfight, and I shoot you first. Okay? 100% that would happen. But I don't kill you. Right? So you are now an incapacitated enemy combatant on a battlefield. I am obligated by international law to render medical aid to you to the best of my ability.
Ridiculous.
No, it's not ridiculous. I think it's perfect. I think it's a fantastic concept. So I'm obligated
To save my life.
to save your life, right? Because you're an incapacitated enemy combatant on the battlefield who 30 seconds ago was just trying to kill me. I think that's a good concept, conceptually, right? But the House of Representatives just passed a law where you can abort a child up to birth for any reason, including sex selection. And in Virginia, they passed a law, if a human child survives an abortion attempt, you're not obligated to render medical aid to that child. You can step outside. The former governor, famous radio interview, said you step outside with your doctor and have a respectful discussion whether or not you're going to render medical aid to that human baby. So if you think about this, you have the most innocent amongst us who survived the most traumatic
law
thing
is
you possibly can.
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
Right.
But you're an enemy combatant on the battlefield. Right. You're just trying to kill me, and I'm obligated by international law to render medical aid to you. That's how upside down things are. And how that becomes a discussion in the public square is by people of good conscience don't say things. They don't we didn't go from abortion being illegal and then abortion being safe, rare, and it was legal, safe, and rare, whatever that term was, to you don't have to render medical aid to a human baby that survives an abortion attempt. That was a 40 or 50 year process. So every time we don't stand up and say
Enough.
This is wrong or enough, they get more ground. There's a saying in the SEAL teams, and it's the standard you allow in your presence is your standard. I don't tolerate racism in my presence. I don't tolerate sexism in my presence. I don't tolerate so many things in my presence because then it becomes your standard. Every human being should be treated with dignity. I may not agree with them politically. I may not agree with them socially. I may not agree with a lot of stuff, but they must be treated with dignity because every human being is a child of God.
But there's disparity in the view you just stated,
100%.
which is, I believe, the view held by most conservatives.
Sure.
Versus the left, which don't have that point of view, which will not tolerate other people's point of view
Right.
and will cancel you. So how are we going to win the battle when the other side is not applying the same rules and ethics? How can we possibly win? That's my fear. My fear is that when we win the House in this upcoming election in 22,
Yeah.
that we won't use our power to close departments of the government, for example, the education department, the energy department, which are rather new departments which have not lived up to their standards of what they were stated to stand for, or the environmental department. You know, we
So
had
just to be clear, the chances of shutting down the Department of Energy, Education, and the EPA are zero.
Why?
Because it's once a federal government, once that is established, the ability to get rid of that department is, for me, I'm going to be a freshman congressman.
Right.
So I will do everything I possibly can to make sure that we can rule justly and legislate. But I also understand that gravity's real. So I'm going to go to Congress and I'm going to represent the people of my district to the best of my ability and always take into account the fact that I'm running for a federal, or at that point be sitting in a federal office.
I understand that. But, these departments were not started in the 1700s when
No,
we
it started in the
established
1970s, right? Under
Okay,
Jimmy
in
Carter,
the
I get it.
70s. Carter established the Department of Energy. And the goal of the Department of Energy was to make, as I understand, was to make America energy independent. Once the goal is achieved, you don't need the department. Let me give you an example. You have a house. When you have a plumbing problem, you call a plumber and he comes and fixes it. You don't hire a plumber full time. And when you have paint that has to be done, you don't hire a painter full time who hangs around your house. Now, this country did have environmental issues. And by and large, they were solved. They were legislated. And at that point, we should have done away with the Department of Environmental Protection. It achieved its objective. That's what you do in business. You hire people to fix a problem, but they're not hired forever. These departments have a life of their own. So what happens is the Department of the Environmental Protection Agency says, oh, okay, those problems were solved, but now we can measure 1 part per billion. So now we're going to tax those companies or attack that. That's what happens when you establish a department forever. It should never have been done. And I think the biggest problem was when George W. Bush was president. We controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. We didn't do anything with that power. We should have. We should have shut down these departments that have done their job, or maybe reduce it 90%. But the problem with government is it never gets smaller. Private enterprise. I've run a company, a public company. When things are tough, you cut expenses. Maybe you have to lay off people. It's a shame. You give them severance. But you take into account the money coming in and the money going out. The federal government has an endless appetite. And it feeds itself because it prints its own money. The only good thing is states can't do that. They have to have a balanced budget. But, I'm very distraught about the Republicans, and I think that they're too passive. The Republicans, conservatives are not active enough in taking charge and in punishing our enemies and in correcting the flaws in our society.
Well, I don't consider, and you may not appreciate this point of view, I don't consider our Democrats, Americans, as my enemies. I have 5 combat tours. I have about 50 of my friends have been killed fighting our enemies.
These were Republicans, Democrats. It didn't matter.
Okay, so
they were fighting for the country.
Right. But let me finish what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm not calling the Democrats in the United States my enemies. I'm not, because I've been to war. And these are fellow Americans who have a divergent political view from me, and they need to be brought on board as Americans. Some of them, their point of view is so far left, I don't think that they're going to come back to a point where we can really have an appreciable discussion with each other. But they're not my enemies. They're still Americans. When push comes to shove, this is what people don't understand. At some point, you run out of family. So you got crazy Uncle Bernie that shows up, who is got a lampshade on his head from Vermont. He's still your family. He is. And at some point, you run out of family. So Americans writ large need to understand that at some point, we're going to be the only family we have.
I think that could happen if we were under attack by a foreign entity, that we could get together as one family. But right now...
Which we did after September 11th. There's an incredible wave of unity.
Right.
Right.
But right now, that is not the case. And
right.
I
don't want that to be the case.
There are such divergent views on what America should be. 2 divergent views that I don't consider them family any longer. They are in favor of a view of America that I cannot support. And I don't think there's a middle ground. But I understand your point. Let's move on to your career in the military.
Sure.
Can you tell us about 1 or 2 missions that you participated in that were the most challenging?
Oh my gosh.
Without divulging any secrets or anything, of course, you can tell.
I'll tell you
something.
one about the most fascinating one that I did. So I've only had one no-fail mission the entire time I've been in the military. And people always think this is a no-fail mission and start making karate
What does that
chopping
mean, a no-fail mission?
That means that if the mission doesn't go as planned, that the ramifications of failure, the ramifications of that mission failing way outweigh what you would normally think.
I see.
So, for instance,
You have to succeed in this mission.
pretty much. So in 2005, this mission was declassified in 2009. In 2005, during the elections in Iraq, the top 6 Iraqi officials were protected by Navy SEAL platoons. And we were wearing civilian clothes. People thought we were contractors. And if you remember what was taking place during that period of time in the war, things were not going well for America. And if one of these officials had been assassinated by the Mahdi militia or any of these other Sunni rebels, it would have been devastating for American foreign policy. So these 6 guys had to stay alive. And I protected a guy named Ibrahim al-Jafri, who was a deputy vice president who became the first democratically elected prime minister in the history of Iraq. And if you remember the pictures with people holding their fingers
Yes,
up
the purple.
with the indelible ink,
Yeah.
there's a picture of him standing in this the press center in Baghdad, holding his finger up, and I'm standing directly behind the camera that took that picture. So you think as a SEAL, you want to have these, parachuting and diving and just doing these crazy mission stories. But one of the proudest moments I ever had as an American was following that voting period. We went back to the vice president's residence, which became the prime minister's residence. And there was people from about the age of 18 to 70 or 80 years old. And they all started spontaneously dancing and singing. And it struck me that this is the first time, you think about it, how old are you now? Ish.
75.
75, okay. So imagine you're 75 years old. You've lived under tyranny.
Forever.
Forever.
Yeah.
You just got to cast a vote. How elated would you be? Right? Jubilant. So if you think about this marble palace with 300 people in there, all dancing and singing because they got to cast a vote to try to determine their own destiny for the first time in 7.5 decades. To me, that made me more proud as an American and as a SEAL than I've really ever been. And I know that's not a cool guy story.
No, it's
also.
not a rah-rah action-adventure story.
But giving,
it's
50
a good
million
one.
people the ability for self-determination. And they screwed it up, 100%.
Of course.
Can't deny that. But that was really something special. That very short period of time, was about 15 minutes out of 26 years, was really, truly special. Yeah. There's other stuff,
What
riding
about
motorcycles.
Afghanistan? You were in Afghanistan?
Twice. Yeah.
Should we have stayed to protect the people against the Taliban?
We should have maintained the levels that were presented. So if you look at the 2,500 American troops to 3,500, be rotating back and forth, plus the 8,000 NATO troops that are going to be there, about 11,000 folks to keep an ISR presence at Bagram Airfield would have been the prudent thing to do. The over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability that Joe Biden was bragging about clearly does not exist. We proved that, or he proved that immediately by killing that family of 10 people, including 7 children, with the missile strike that was supposed to be the guy that did the bombing outside the gate, Abbey Gate. It's just not true. The over-horizon counterterrorism ability for the United States military is based on being able to get 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 folks out, not the thousands of American citizens that Joe Biden abandoned in Afghanistan.
How is it possible for military planners to say, let's take the soldiers out first, and then we'll worry about the Americans who are left behind? What kind of thinking does that come from?
People asked me this. They say, Derrick, I was never in the military, but it seems like you should have pulled the State Department diplomats and civilians out before you removed the military. What am I missing? And I tell them nothing.
Yep.
It was an incredibly foolish, botched mission by a group of people that didn't have a plan until it was too late. And it's completely inexcusable. The one sacred duty that a commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, has is to protect American civilians.
That's it.
And he abjectly failed. So, and this is not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue or an independent or a libertarian issue. This is a basic American citizen issue. That is, do not pass go, do not collect $200 when the president of the United States abandons American citizens to terrorists.
And there was no urgency to do that. Although there was a schedule, there was no urgency. And under Trump, as I understand it, not one American was harmed because he told the leader of the Taliban, you harm an American, you won't, he lives.
So what President Trump said is it was a conditions-based withdrawal schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So Taliban, you do this, you do this, you do this, we'll move out. You do this, we're going to strike you, which he did.
Okay, good.
All right.
Good.
Biden put a date on a calendar. That was it, with no conditions.
There was no such date.
No, there was a date. He said, we're leaving by this date.
I see.
And with no conditions attached.
Right.
That's why everything fell apart. The fact that the State Department gave away Bagram Airfield. So these missions they're non-combatant evacuation. So they're NEOs, right? Mm-hmm. Those are run by the State Department, facilitated by the Department of Defense. That's doctrinal, right? That's how it does. So the State Department did not want the optics of leaving the embassy and HKIA, Hamid Karzai International Airport, leaving the capital of Kabul to fall back to Bagram. Didn't want the optics because it would look bad politically. So they gave up Bagram Airfield, which has the capacity for life support for thousands of people, 2 airfields. You can run combat missions and you can run evacuation missions. It has all the,
huge airfield.
It's a huge airfield. It's in an area where you have to use these things called RAPs, rocket-assisted projectiles, in order to hit the airfield with munitions.
So not easy to do.
Very difficult to do. You can shoot an RPG into the airfield in the middle of Kabul. That's why they stopped evacuations, because people would be shooting at the airfield. So it was
we never should have given up Bagram till the end.
Correct. But that was a decision based on political optics, which means Secretary Blinken should be relieved. Secretary Austin should be relieved. General Milley should be relieved.
But it seems these
Sullivan.
are not mistakes, because the average person with common sense says it should be this way. So it seems intentional. And the leaving behind of, I've heard the numbers, $80 billion of weaponry.
I think it was more like 85, yeah.
Over $80 billion of weaponry without retrieving it or without destroying it. It's not a mistake. It had to be done intentionally.
Well, you're wrong. And this is why. There's still Americans in Afghanistan. How many Americans were held hostage in Iran? Do you know?
I think it was 400, something like that.
It was 52.
Oh, I thought it was 400 days, right?
It was 444 days. Yeah. There was 52 Americans held hostage in Iran for 444 days. It stopped the entire world. 57 Americans were repatriated last December. Are you aware of this? This is after the State Department said everybody's back.
From Afghanistan.
We brought 57 more back. There's still manifests for hundreds of American citizens that are held in Afghanistan. So the Biden administration, by leaving these American citizens to be hostages, the Taliban, could not destroy the equipment, because then the Taliban would be putting American citizens on the news in orange jumpsuits. So they set themselves up to not be able to destroy this equipment because they left the Americans there.
But that whole thing about leaving the Americans there, it's not by accident, in my view.
So the planning process was so far behind the 8 ball that when they developed that plan, General Miller developed that plan, they knew that Americans were going to be left behind. So that means when they signed off those plans, they intentionally left them. That is correct. And that's unforgivable. Every one of those military officers should be fired. Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of them should be fired. But they couldn't destroy the equipment because the American citizens were there. That's why.
But that's because they made the whole mistake of not removing the American citizens ahead of time.
Right.
Right? Well, it's a very sad time for America. I know when we left Afghanistan,
we're in a tight spot, man.
Terrible.
We're in a tight spot.
Terrible. The most powerful country of the world. And now we're begging Iran to enter into negotiations again. What is that about?
We're not begging Iran. We've asked Russia to negotiate for us with Iran.
Oh, wonderful.
To re-enter
our good friend Russia.
The Iran nuke deal.
Well, the Russia that controls President Trump, evidently. Right.
That is, I mean, what do you say to that?
What do you say to that?
So people, they argue with me all the time and they say that Vladimir Putin would have invaded the Ukraine when President Trump was in office. Right. I'm like, hey, dude hasn't been in office for 13 months. So they didn't do it. And it's like, how do you know Vladimir Putin wouldn't invade Ukraine when President Trump was in office?
Because they didn't.
Because he didn't. It's that simple.
It's very simple.
It's Occam's razor. The most obvious answer. Sure.
Okay, let's move on to a different topic, movies.
Sure.
How did now, normally, if I got to interview somebody who was a star in an action movie, that would be the highlight of the interview of the podcast. But in this case, it plays a small role in your various careers.
Sure.
So tell me, you were an active duty SEAL at the time, and
Correct.
you still got to play in a movie. How is that possible? Must be the government wanted positive PR for the SEALs or something.
Yeah. Well, Navy SEALs are the most elegant practitioners of the art of war. We simply are. And we had been very, very effective in Afghanistan at the time. This is around 2011. We're kicking this around. And Donald Rumsfeld wanted an additional 500 Navy SEALs because we were so effective. And the officers were like, yes, sir, we'll, whip those right out for you. The next year, the net gain of SEALs, after combat losses, retirements, guys just not want to be frogmen anymore, was 1. So
not easy to be
499 out of 500 short for the Secretary of Defense, which is super bad, right? And a guy named Duncan Smith, he's a friend of mine. He was at Naval Special Warfare Command, and they're sitting around trying to figure out what to do. And he was like, hey, remember when they made Top Gun? Everybody joined the Navy. Didn't tell anybody you had to go to college to be a pilot, but everybody. So recruiting spiked, and they said, let's make a movie. That was the genesis of that. It was in order to boost recruitment for Navy SEALs, and it's been very effective.
Okay.
And what that turned out to be is it's a fantastic testament to my fallen brothers. If you watch that movie, and there's a bunch of little quirky things, like this guy gets an RPG in the chest and it doesn't blow up. And,
right. I saw that
just all
today.
these kind of like weird things that took place. They really happened. And
at different times.
At different times from September 11th to Navy SEALs in combat. And the last thing, of course, is when the officer in the movie, he kind of reprises what Mikey Mansour did in Iraq, when he got the Medal of Honor, where he jumps on a hand grenade and saves the guys around him.
That did happen.
That happened. That's Mike Mansour. That they're replaying that. It wasn't in a warehouse. It was on a rooftop. But so from that aspect, it's great because it tells stories of the heroism of the people that I worked with. You know what I mean? I mean, I've got to hang around some of the coolest people ever. And what it did for me personally is it allowed me to speak to my family about my job. And I was asked to be in that movie by our Commodore, a guy named Tom Brown, who unfortunately has been dead now for about a year and a half. Admiral. He retired as an admiral. And he was like, hey, Van-O, these guys want, it was Van Orden, so they call me Van-O. Now they call me DVO, but the Bandito guys want you to be in that movie. And I said, you can't order me to be in a movie. You can't. Mm-hmm. He's like, you're right. Go home and talk to Sarah Jane, my wife. And I did. I said, hey, remember the Hollywood guys came out because they visited us during training. No one volunteered to be in the movie. Nobody, zero.
Really? I would think people would be excited about being.
Yeah, well, no one cares about being in movies when you're in the SEAL teams.
I see. You want to fight.
You want to work, right? It's not about that.
Yeah.
And
yeah. But if it was described to you as that it's going to help us recruit more people, then you would do it.
Absolutely not. No one cares.
No one.
No.
Cares.
So I went home and I told Sarah. No. I went and talked to Sarah. And I said, remember those Hollywood guys who wanted me to be in the movie? And she said, well, what did you say? And I said, no, I'm a SEAL, I'm not an actor. And she said, well, if you did that movie, maybe your kids would know why you spent so much time away from home. Mm-hmm. Out of my 21 years as a SEAL, I spent about 16 years away from home. Because a SEAL's natural environment is combat. Right. So you're either training or you're deploying, or you're recovering, and then you're training. And that's how people need to start looking at problem sets in America, is like that. So anyway, that's how your wife tells you to be in a movie. And so I did that one.
Were you the only active Navy SEAL who was in that movie?
Everybody in that movie who was wearing an American military uniform was an active duty serviceman or woman while that movie was being filmed. That movie will never be made again. That movie took like 3 years to film because every person except for the officer in that movie deployed to combat during the filming of that movie.
You had to put it on hold.
All of those assets were lined up by the Navy. So they do these planning things. It's a palm cycle. So they lay out training for like 3 years. Like this submarine will be in this place in the ocean at this time.
Sure.
Boom.
And here are the people who have to be on it.
And you're either there or you're not.
Right.
That's how the submarine scene showed up.
I see.
All these platforms that were used were pre-scheduled training events that were taking place so the movie company didn't have to pay for them because they're already paid for.
I see. Got it.
So it'll never...
So it took forever because deployments and things like that. They would have been better off hiring actors.
Well, if you see some of the acting, they probably would have been better off being actors. Trust me. Yeah, we are not. We're clearly SEALs, but we had a bit of authenticity that you couldn't get, and I think conceptually it's very interesting.
And the things that are portrayed, of course, it didn't all happen during
within a single cycle.
Within a single cycle, but was it a realistic portrayal of
pretty
Navy
much?
SEALs?
Yeah, I mean, there's the Hollywood grenades. Grenades don't make a big gas bomb, by the way.
I see. Okay,
they're very. They're kind of sort of disappointing when you throw hand grenades. They just don't. They don't make that big thing. If you notice when the guys are going into that town that's actually filmed on San Clemente Island, that they have night vision on.
Yes.
And then they have visible lasers.
Yes, I wondered about that myself.
Okay, so we don't do that.
You wouldn't see the laser.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
Because we use infrared lasers for that. But that's so that people in the audience who are watching this can see what they're doing. We got that. And then what was really funny is we watched that movie with George Bush down in Dallas. They got all the SEALs together. They rented this movie theater, and we watched that movie with them. None of us had seen it. None of the SEALs. And the former president hadn't either. So we get done, and there's that sniper scene, where the guy comes up and he raises his hands out of the water.
Yes.
They shoot the guy, and he catches him, and he lowers it down.
Yes. I remember. I just saw it today.
So awesome, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We pull these guys aside, the directors, and they're like, hey, are you kidding me? Like, that's completely hooey, right? Would not happen. It's physics are real, right? So here's how that developed. There was a production assistant, and he's like, hey, guys, I have an idea. Why don't they shoot the guy, then they catch him in the water and lower him down? And they're like, that's dumb, because 2 out of the 3 directors were stuntmen. And they understand how things work. Gravity's real, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to work. And he's like, no, it'll be awesome. So that production assistant got in the water. They drop this guy, and he crushes him into the water. But then they're like, wait a minute. Okay, hold on. So that was filmed in the stop getting, like the
Yeah.
claymation
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
They lowered that guy down incrementally.
Yeah, on film.
Set him in the hands.
And then they load
Right.
him. Yeah.
So we're all in the director's faces. We're like, that's just junk. What are you like? We're sorry. Like, no, leave it in the movie because
Yeah, but
it's
look good.
totally cool.
Yeah, look good.
Yeah, but it's BS,
He was on a parapet or something, and they fired.
He's on a dock.
Yeah.
And then they shoot him, and
they
then
lower
Dave
him
actually
down,
catches him.
yeah.
Lower.
Oh,
And then there's just like things that as a SEAL. Like for instance, when you're gonna jump out of an airplane and you're wearing O2, you pre-breathe for like 3 hours. You saturate your body with oxygen. You're hooked up to a console, and then you go to this bottle inside your parachute. So you're not like sitting there with the open aircraft and your mask.
Talking,
You're
and
like,
then you
now
put
I'm going to put my mask on.
Oh, that wouldn't work?
No, you're at 25,000 feet. You'd be hypoxic. And you'd be laying on the deck of the aircraft. You'd be passed out.
I see. Okay.
So there's
sure.
parts of the story that are very accurate, and then there's parts that are put in
But the
there.
equipment is fantastic that you
A
get,
lot of
right?
it is, yeah. One of my favorite scene in that whole movie, and you may find this odd, is when they parachute in and they're going to go to. I give them a brief about rescuing Roberta Sanchez. I can't remember her name in the movie, but and they parachute in, and everything's really noisy. The plane's going, and then when you're parachuting, you're going about 120, 130 miles an hour. So there's a lot of wind noise in your ear. But then when you land, everything is completely quiet. And watch that movie again and see the transition from this total chaos and noise to silence.
In the jungle.
And then you'll see the guys as they kind of, flip the switch from performing a series of predetermined functions, and you have to always be thinking about parachute malfunctions and all this stuff. So their minds are working, and it's kind of like driving to work. You know what I mean? So that's the commute to work. And then when they hit the ground is when you're actually at your job. It's very interesting. And just that transition.
They handled that well in the movie.
Perfectly. That was really, really well done.
Now, I've always wondered because SEALs take their weapons into the water.
Sure.
How do rifles function? Doesn't the powder and the bullets get wet, or they're special hermetically sealed bullets?
Well, we don't have muzzle loaders any longer, so we have the bullets themselves are waterproof.
Oh, they are.
Yes.
Even the ones that I buy when I go to the shooting range?
So there's a bullet, then
Yes.
a casing,
Yes.
a primer, there's powder. That's called a round. Mm-hmm. The whole thing is called a round. So when I say the bullets are waterproof, I mean the round is
The
waterproof.
round is waterproof.
Right. But you don't want to reuse rounds that you repeatedly get wet. So if you're training with rounds, which you should, or you should train with magazines that
Yes.
have lead. They've got lead shot in this rubber, so they're the same weight.
Okay, I understand.
If you're training with those, then you're not wasting ammunition. But if you're training with live ammunition in the water, then it should be disposed of properly.
But even the ammunition that I buy, 9mm, those can work underwater. You can.
Well, you don't shoot them underwater.
Yes, I understand.
They
that.
can get wet.
They can get wet, and
then you can
the
fire.
primer will still fire.
Correct.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not ripping the paper off.
Well,
Prepare
great
to defend
stories,
yourself.
Great
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah, so that was a good movie. And then John Voight's a buddy of mine who I met.
Is he in that movie?
No, he's not.
No, right.
But he's in Surviving the Wild, which I got to do with him, which is super fun.
I saw the preview of that. Is that worth watching?
It's a family movie,
Okay.
and it's good. I wanted to do a thing with him because
I
we're
like
friends.
John Voight. He is a special
John is one of the finest Americans you're ever going to meet in your life.
and rare in Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
He's conservative.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more conservatives in Hollywood than
Well,
than
they're
you know
hiding.
about.
They're hiding.
I have to because of this environment.
Yeah.
And I think it's baloney. But yeah, so John and I did that movie, and then I did another one called
Alfaza or something?
Running with the Devil.
Oh, that one I don't know.
Yeah, it was
No,
written.
there was something with a single name, Alfaza, something like that.
Oh, no, Azada.
Azada.
That was a short.
Oh,
I played a Marine Corps colonel. which was fun. That's with Jonathan Sheck. He did That Thing You Do in some other movies. And
I didn't see that one.
yeah, he's a friend of mine too. Just happened to meet. But
Another career, number four. Well, actually, number 3. Number 4 was starting the Butternut Cafe,
right.
which you did as a, as a thank you to your community and to
Right.
the village of Butternut.
Yeah.
Well, before we conclude, I'd like you to talk about the aspects of your upbringing and your personality traits that brought you to success. For example, your mother's influence on you, your religious faith, and key personality traits, so that the viewers can get a sense of what it takes. What is special about a person like you that makes you who you are and successful?
Okay. Well, we talked about it earlier. I was raised in abject poverty
Unbelievable.
by a
Now, I
single
want the
mom.
audience to understand
Right.
that this is poverty in the backwoods. This is not poverty in the inner city. It's very different. And
There's amount of social services that are available in urban areas that aren't in rural areas.
Just not
Just the way it is. You have to depend more on family. So, yeah, my mom raised my brother and I. My ma, she died 7 years ago now, but she was one of 10 Irish Catholic. She had a very serious work ethic, and she showed my brother and I that you can overcome diversity if you really put your nose to the grindstone. So we were latchkey kids. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 years old. I did 2 weeks of my sophomore year of high school. I've been supporting myself since I was 16.
do you hear this? There are many people in our society believe that without a college degree, you can't succeed. This is a
Right.
counterexample to that.
Now, hold on a sec, though, because I did go on to get a degree later. So I joined the Navy at 18, got a GED, worked on a tugboat, talked a little bit about that earlier. But I wound up getting my undergraduate degree when I was 44 years old because our youngest daughter was giving me and Sarah Jane a hard time about how difficult it was to be in college. And, she's a young lady. And I said, you know what, Abs, I'm going to get my degree as an active duty Navy SEAL. I was on shore duty at the time, thankfully. So I did that because so many people just tell people to do things, right?
Instead of leading
by example, right?
Got it.
Right. So I did that. I got my degree at 44 and then actually got accepted to law school when I turned 50.
Yeah, but you were successful before you had that degree.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So my
No.
point is degrees aren't the key. It's ambition, it's perseverance, it's tenacity that are the keys to success.
I think we can learn things from good and bad examples. I had a bad example for a father, so I decided not to do that. And you just have to decide to do things. One of the greatest, if not, I think the greatest marketing slogan in the history of the world was Nike's "Just Do It." Mm-hmm. And then people really don't understand what that says. It says "Just do it," but then what's right after that? A period.
Right.
There's a period. Just do it, period. So if you see something, you identify a problem, and you can figure out a solution, then do it. There's so many people that identify problems.
They are overwhelmed by
They
it.
identify a solution, but they never actually do it.
Right.
You just got to just do it. And I give people encouragement all the time. It really, truly, in the United States of America, does not matter where you start. I came from the meanest circumstances you really can in this country. And next year, I'm going to be in Congress.
Next year, you'll be a congressman.
Right. So check this out. Single mom, broken family, poverty, single generation.
Grinding poverty, right?
Single generation, highest levels of power in the most powerful country in the world. Yep. Who do I share that with? Barack Obama. And herein endeth the similarities. So that guy came from a broken home. His father abandoned him and his mom. And within a single generation, he was the president of the United States. So when people are telling you, you can't do things in America, due to your socioeconomic group or your race or your gender or your orientation, you have to look at it objectively and understand that they're not telling you the truth.
They're not telling you the truth.
It worked for Barack Obama, and it's working for me.
you.
That's the American dream, dude. That's what it's all about. And that the ability for my story, the arc of my life to take place, it can only happen in America. It's not called the Australian dream, the English dream, the Irish dream, the German dream. It's called the American dream. Yep. And I've lived on 5 of the 7 continents and worked there in villages, like worked with the people. And I've seen it with my own eyes. This is the only nation in the world where my story can happen again and again. Look at Winsome Sears in Virginia, lieutenant governor, moved here from Haiti, joined the Marine Corps. She's the lieutenant governor of Virginia.
Nowhere else could that happen.
Nowhere else.
Nowhere else.
No. And there's something else about America.
Anyone who tells us differently, these assholes, these leftists who tell us about race that matters and white privilege, it's bullshit. If there was so much white privilege, how did Barack Obama get to be president for 8 years?
So when people are telling you that, they're selling you something you don't want to buy.
That's it.
It's very simple.
They hate America, these people.
I think a lot of them don't even understand what America means.
Yeah, well, that's right.
We could just talk forever about that, but I mean, I am grateful every day. I wake up and I am full of gratitude. I get to go around and talk to the coolest people in the world. I hang out in coffee shops. I ride a motorcycle. I drink beer. I shoot guns. I am with the folks that have built America. They're in my district. Like when I was overseas and I would think about America, I was thinking about where I live. And that happens to be the 3rd Congressional District of the state of Wisconsin. And I didn't even live there yet. But the vision of America that I've held is where I live. I live there on purpose. I could have lived anywhere in the world. And I intentionally chose to live in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin with my wife because to me, that embodies America. And that's not going to change. And I tell you what, Slick, that's worth fighting for. It is.
That's what we're all fighting for.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Derrick, you've accomplished an incredible amount in your life, and you still have 20 more years to continue to be productive.
Well, I hope it's more than that. I'm only 52.
Well, at least 20 more years to be productive, at least, right? I want to thank you for spending time with me today, and I want to thank you so much more for your past services to the country as a Navy SEAL and for your desire to continue to serve our great country as a member of Congress. I hope and I pray that you will be successful in your quest for a seat in Congress, and when you're there, I am certain that you will fight to make America great again.
Of course.
Thank you
America's
so much.
worth the work. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. If you enjoy these interviews with some of today's most influential thought leaders, please follow and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, you can also watch each episode on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.